Welcome, dear listener. Tonight we will travel to the 15th century Florence, to visit the man of secrets, to place a folded letter beside a compass and a stick of charcoal, the simplest resume a restless mind could write. What would you promise a city? A bridge in a day, a stage that moves like weather, a portrait that keeps breathing after you leave the room. He was way ahead of his time. If this cozy story helps you drift off, please subscribe, tap like, and leave a gentle comment. Your support keeps the journey continues. Let's make the room quiet and simple. A wooden table, a small oil lamp with a steady flame, and the sorts of things a mind reaches for when it means to make something. A stub of charcoal, a folded cloth, a cup with a tremor of water. If you're listening in bed, you can imagine the lamp's light widening into a soft circle. In that circle lies a notebook with thick pages, the kind that hold the memory of a hand. Tonight, we open it the way you might open a window at evening, slowly so the cool air arrives without fuss. We will visit Leonardo da Vinci as if we're visiting a neighbour's workshop after sunset, when tools rest and thoughts are easier to hear. He's born in 1452, in the small hill town of Vinci, where terraces of olives and vines step down the slopes as if the land itself is practicing perspective. The house is plain and serviceable. A carved chest, a stool, a shelf with jugs the colour of baked earth. Between the town and the fields, a young boy walks with an eye that stays awake even when the rest of him is drowsy with summer. He gathers feathers, pebbles, seed pods. He takes the long way home because water running in a ditch is a story that deserves its ending. If childhood is a pocket, his is full of small specimens, what an adult might call clutter, and what a future painter-engineer quietly names data. You can picture him setting his treasures in rows on the windowsill, turning each leaf to see how the veins curve and where the green thins to pale. It's an early lesson that you might recognise yourself. Attention is a kind of affection. Family arrangements in this time are practical rather than sentimental. Leonardo is born out of wedlock to Ser Piero, a notary who deals in documents and seals, and to Caterina, whose life turns another way. He grows among relatives who accept him with a firmness that is not demonstrative but is real all the same. In his world, status can be a braided cord and one strand may be frayed, but the cord still holds. The boy learns that circumstances are not destiny. What you do with your hands, how you see the world, and how patiently you return to a question, those become your biography as much as any paper decree. When he is old enough for his questions to need better tools, the road carries him to Florence. The city is a hive of stone, warm bread, wool, and bargaining. Workshops front the streets, their doors open like mouths. A passerby can glance in and see metal cooling to a darker red, hear voices discussing a commission, smell glue warming in a pot, and notice the humble items that make high art possible. Rabbit skin glue, chalk linen, beeswax, jars of ground minerals with the allure of small planets. If a modern city speaks in notifications, Florence speaks in bells and the footsteps. On the bridge, water slips under arches as if rehearsing for the pages Leonardo will one day fill with eddies and countercurrents. He enters the atelier of Andrea del Verrocchio, a place where painting and sculpture share the same air. Think of a long room with tall windows, benches scarred by useful mistakes, and racks where panels rest like sleeping tablets. Apprentices move through the day with a rhythm you could set your pulse by. Sweep the floor, glue the canvas, gesso the board, sand again. The first skill is patience with preparation. A panel doesn't become a painting because of a single inspiration. It becomes a painting because chalk dust settles, and someone wipes it away, and the surface turns from rough to almost skin. The next skill is humility and repetition. Grinders turn and turn as azurite breaks down into a powder that promises sky. The room smells of vinegar, oil, wood shavings. If there is music, it's the quiet kind, the kind your mind supplies when you watch a good hand do a familiar task. Leonardo, long-fingered and left-handed, fits himself to this living machine. He draws draperies from life, taking scraps of cloth and arranging them over a small figure, then shading each fold with such concentration that a sleeve seems to exhale. He copies faces and studies noses, as if they are landscapes with their own gentle hills and shaded valleys. Every so often an apprentice reaches for a tool and finds it already warm from the last hand that held it. That is how knowledge travels here, not through thunder, but through shared heat. The studio is a school without the desks. Geometry takes its lessons from the sharp sunlight, which throws angled shadows that can be measured with the eye. Proportions are not a set of laws shouted from a podium. They are ratios you sense first with your fingers when you hold a compass, and the legs settle into a satisfying circle. Leonardo watches how a face turns in space and discovers that between the hard lines there lies a region of almost, where colour passes into colour the way an evening sky passes into itself. Later people give it a name, sfumato, smoke-like softness, but for now it is simply a decision to let edges breathe. Under Verrocchio's direction, apprentices contribute to works destined for proud altars and bright courts. One day, a young hand is trusted with an angel in a larger painting. The angel's hair is treated like water, studying how to become ringlets. The sleeve carries light the way a calm river carries reflections. Stories will later claim that Verrocchio saw the freshness of this figure and stopped painting altogether for a long while. Whether that tale is neat truth or tidy legend, the gentler lesson remains. A teacher's pride can be the kind that makes room for the student's touch. In this room there is always more work than ego. Leonardo's questions multiply as tools multiply. In a corner he tries a small experiment with a pinhole and a darkened space. An early flirtation with the idea that images can form on their own if light is channeled with courtesy. He notices how dust moves in a shaft of afternoon sun, and infers something about fluid motion. He watches birds and doesn't simply admire, he counts. How many wing beats between the tower and the cypress? How does a feather bend when the air thickens near the body? If the studio's curriculum includes saints and armour, Leonardo's personal curriculum adds water, light, and flight. It's as if he keeps a second set of textbooks that the city didn't assign, and he studies them at night. You can imagine his early notebooks taking shape, the famous mirror writing marching steadily across a page, not so much a secret code as a comfortable accommodation to a left-handed hand that prefers to pull ink rather than push it. The pages hold diagrams of gears that fit together like neighbours who get along, and lists of materials useful to keep near, the practical grocery list of a life committed to imagining. Occasionally, there is a small joke for himself, a note about a curious thing seen in the market, a sketch of a face glimpsed in the curvature of a knotty plank. The notebooks are not tidy treatises. They are a place where questions can spill safely. If modern minds sometimes keep too many browser tabs open, Leonardo solves the same problem by binding the tabs into a book and giving them a cover. Outside the studio, Florence is full of argument and pageant. Processions move through squares that smell of wax and stone. A poet recites under a loggia. A money changer counts with a steady thumb. And always there is the river, doing its uncomplicated best to keep going. Leonardo absorbs it all. He learns that a city is a system. Water in, waste out, goods in, crafts out, ideas in, murals out. He notices that architecture and anatomy share a vocabulary. Arches that bear loads, columns that rise, joints that turn, vaults that hold space like lungs. These are not metaphors for the sake of pretty talk. They are bridges built inside the mind so that a truth in one field can cross to another without getting lost. Commissions arrive, some begun with zeal, a few completed with that uncommon calm that only comes when an idea and a deadline shake hands and agree to suit each other. Others are postponed while a new question nudges his sleeve. It becomes a gentle theme in his life, starting as a door that opens easily, finishing as a door that requires not more genius but more patience. He often has both. Occasionally he does not. Rather than scold him across centuries, we might admit that many of us have a drawer where our nearly done masterpieces live. The difference is that his drafts are of such quality that even their beginnings teach later generations what beginnings can be. In the studio, someone moves a tray of pigments closer. You could take a moment to see them with the care he gives. Lapis for heavenly blues, ground down reluctantly because beauty resists becoming mere ingredient. Vermilion that promises warmth. earth colours gathered from fields not unlike the ones in Vinci. Walnut oil gleams in a small flask like a promise of gloss. A goose quill lies beside a straightage. These are humble things, and in their humility lies the particular democracy of making. A masterpiece arrives by way of heated glue and scraped hides and sanded gesso. The sublime rides into the world on a cart of everyday labour. Leonardo's pages will later be filled with machines meant to help labourers carry, lift and turn with less strain. Perhaps the sympathy begins here, with gratitude for the practical companions that bring vision to the wall. There is a moment when he stands before a panel and lets his eyes rest not on the centre, but on the spaces where air would be if air could be painted. This is the beginning of his peculiar tenderness with transitions. He understands that bodies do not end where outlines say they end. Light trespasses gently. This understanding becomes a style, but first it is a kind of ethics. The world is not a set of separate parts snapped together, it is a set of meetings. The haze at a horizon is not an error, just the atmosphere reminding painter and viewer that distances are not legal borders but invitations. Later, when people speak of that smile in a later portrait, they will feel that it belongs in this lineage of kindness to edges. News occasionally comes from other quarters, a rumour of a competition for a panel, a patron's request for a new altarpiece, a friend's note about a festival that needs a clever machine to surprise a crowd. Leonardo has a knack for these in-between tasks, the ones that ask an artist to think like an engineer, and an engineer to think like a stage director. He sketches a pulley with the same courtesy he gives a hand. He drafts an angel's wing with the same curiosity he will one day give to a bridge. The categories that fence us in have not yet built their walls for him. He moves across disciplines as calmly as a walker steps from sun to shade. In the evenings, he returns to the smallest theatre of all, a study lit by a window, a chair smoothed by use, a box of charcoal that leaves its fine dusk wherever it rests. He tries a new medium because he suspects it will explain something the old one would not. He revises an earlier sketch because the day offered a better idea than yesterday did. He makes notes on proporo that are really notes on grace. He writes that a painter should aim to represent not just the visible, but the causes of the visible. This is the temper of a mind that considers every surface an effect and is determined to learn the underlying reasons. Water moves this way because the bed of the river leans. A face softens because muscles lift and skin thins. A shadow pools because light meets an obstacle and finds a way around it or doesn't. A day in Verrocchio's workshop begins to end the way good days do. Clean tools, swept floor, a last look to be sure a panel is safe from drafts. The masters and assistants step out into streets where stones still hold the day's warmth. Leonardo lingers a moment longer. He draws a small knot on a scrap purely for the pleasure of seeing the rope turn. He sets a jar back on a shelf in the order he prefers, because quiet order makes room for the next question. He might smile at the thought that the city is a mechanism with many hands. If it runs well, it is because those hands cooperate. If there is a joke tucked into this routine, it is a soft one. Mastery in the end looks a lot like tidying. We could follow him now into the courtyard where a cistern holds the day's sky, and we might mention that a boy who loved ditches and rivulets is now a man who sketches locks and canals with a planner's calm delight. But we will save the machinery of cities for another night. Here, toward the end of our first visit, let's hold the three threads we meant to keep. Light, which begins as a lamp but will eventually be the study of optics and perception. Water, which begins as a childhood fascination and will become the mathematics of turbulence and the civility of a working canal. Hands, which begin as the instruments of craft and will become the theme of a life. Hands that bottle clay, fold letters, turn pages, and return to the table even when the hour is late. Before we leave, we return to the workbench. The lamp is still steady. On the table are the small objects that, for most people, remain only objects. A quill, a straightedge, a cake of charcoal, a piece of chalk, a square of linen, a little mortar with a rim polished by years of turning. In Leonardo's keeping, these are companions, and in ours, they can be reminders that attention is abundance. You may have a notebook of your own nearby. You may have a glass of water that catches the room's dim light in a way that pleases you. That is more than enough for tonight. When we go on, we will carry the scent of this room and the confidence of its routine with us to Milan. where courts like elaborate puzzles will ask for festivals, facades, and a mural that turns a simple table into a long conversation. But for now, we let the day's chalk settle. We let the city's bells be someone else's problem. We let a cool drift of air slip in at the window and stir the page, where a small sketch of a feather waits for its next line. The lamp, which started our walk, is there to end it. It casts a circle of understanding on the wood. You can step away whenever you like, and when you come back, you'll find the circle still there, the tools patient, the questions ready to resume in the morning. The story resumes as if someone has turned a page and rested a palm to keep it open. The road has changed from Tuscan paths to Lombard streets, and Florence's crowded brilliance gives way to Milan's brick strength and measured canals. Leonardo arrives with a portfolio that is more a promise than a parade. Sketches of bridges that could be assembled like reason itself, notes on fortifications meant to bear weather as much as worry, designs for pageants where the city can see itself in a happier costume. He brings a letter that quietly lists the services he can supply, a resume in the key of possibility. If you have ever tried to describe yourself for a job and ended up sounding like a Swiss Army knife with feelings, you are in his company. Ludovico Sforza's court is both practical and theatrical. The city expects bridges, drainage and order. The court expects festivities, grace, and the impression that everything happens effortlessly. Leonardo fits both expectations because he prefers problems that ask the hand and the mind to collaborate. Each morning the workshop stirs, pine shavings on the floor, iron tools laid in a neat roll, a tall jar where charcoal rests upright like black reeds. In the corner stands a growing horse, first in small models, then in a towering clay form, the bronze monument intended to honour a dynasty and praise the discipline of balance. The horse is not merely animal, it is geometry in motion, weight turned into poise. The measurements are careful not because numbers are austere, but because sculpture trusts arithmetic the way a bridge trusts its abutments. Not far away, water moves with the calm of a well-run household. Milan's canals are not ornaments, they are the city's working lungs. Leonardo observes the way a gate lifts and lowers, the way current divides and rejoins, the way a small change upstream becomes a large change downstream. He drafts locks that treat water with respect, asking it to wait, then to proceed, as a kindly usher might. On paper, his diagrams are clean, straight lines, half circles, notations in the mirrored script his hand favours. In the courtyard, his assistants file, chamfer and test, the workshop's patience rippling outward into the city's arteries. Here again, the motifs we carry continue their unhurried walk. Light falls across a plan and makes the ink glow softly. Water attends to its roots. Hands keep the peace between idea and wood. Festivals punctuate the engineering with borrowed starlight. The court likes to surprise itself with illusions that are not dishonest so much as playful. Sources suggest Leonardo designs moving scenery, stage devices that unfurl like polite flowers, and costumes stitched with metals that catch candlelight just enough to make the room breathe in. He draws masks and mechanisms in the same book, where he calculates gear ratios. When a pageant lion lifts a paw and reveals a tender message, we can suspect whose sketch made it possible. The line between entertainment and experiment is thin, and on the right evening the line dissolves. Leonardo's pleased by this. To him, curiosity is best served in public. In Santa Maria delle Grazie, the refectory waits quietly for its great conversation. The room is long and cool, with a floor that remembers many careful steps and walls wide enough for a theme to unfold. He studies the wall as if it were a person he means to understand. Fresco requires speed and compromise. Pigment goes on wet plaster, and the plaster sets the pace. Leonardo wants a slower dance, more glazes, more time for shadows to make their case. He chooses a technique that allows him to return, to reconsider, to let a hand rest till the hand knows what to do. This is generous to the painter and unkind to the wall. We acknowledge the later tenderness of its surface without making it a tragedy. The work was a risk. It has paid and paid again, even as the years ask it for interest. The table stretches from one end of the apostles to the other. There is bread broken and bread unbroken, a drift of salt, a careful spill of wine that looks like a pause in speech. Leonardo composes not a frozen instant but a widening circle, each figure receiving the event differently, as people do in any dining room where the news tilts the air. Hands speak first. A hand open in confusion, a hand pointing in protest, a hand retreating to the comfort of a cup. The eye follows those hands and then follows the architecture, which he aligns so that all the lines of the room gather at the calm face in the centre. This is perspective as hospitality. The geometry does not show off. It guides the guest to the host. Light comes from the imagined windows in the painting, and from the real windows of the refectory. The two sources mingle, and the scene feels something like weather. You listening are allowed to think of other tables, where news once arrived and rearranged your own evening. Between sessions on the wall, the workshop continues like a measured breath. There is the Virgin of the Rocks, its cave a cool envelope around the figures, its plants described with a botanist's courtesy. Water threads the stones, and light finds the edges of leaves, as though nature herself had agreed to pose. Leonardo makes the background a teacher. Depth becomes not a ladder of diminishing sizes, but a gradation of air, a lesson in how distance behaves. He returns to his notebooks the way some people return to the kitchen between tasks, to stir a pot, to taste, to add a pinch of something. A page might hold a wing seen from 6 angles, a screw for lifting water, a plan for an ideal city with clean streets and practical grace. The handwriting remains steady, and the margin notes often read like reminders to a future self. Test this, observe that, avoid smoke near varnish. For the Sforza court, the huge bronze horse is a promise in progress. Clay is patient but not eternal. Weather asks to be included in every plan. The foundry requirements are daunting. The logistics a puzzle that requires supplies, labour, and favourable days. The model stands under a protective cloth when not in use, a sleeping giant in a room that smells of damp earth and oil. History will intervene and the metal reserved for the casting will be summoned to other tasks. We say this gently. Projects are conversations with time, and sometimes time interrupts. The unfinished monument becomes an image of a city's ambitions, and the city moves on, because cities must. Milan keeps asking, and Leonardo keeps answering with drawings that have the calm of good advice. He proposes bridges that can be assembled quickly, notes designs for sluices and embankments that would spare neighbourhoods the discouragement of standing water, and improves tools by making them kinder on the wrist. He pays attention to workers and writes with sympathy about how a device might spare a back or save an afternoon. His pages show that technology is not a parade of cleverness, but a practice of care. If he occasionally embellishes his portfolio with more capacities than anyone could use in a single week, well, who among us has not put a few optimistic items on a to-do list? Sometimes the court's needs are less grand and more ornamental. There are fates where a false heaven must descend with convincing grace, or a starry wheel must rotate because the story asks it to. For these, Leonardo offers mechanisms that are sturdy under silk. He tests a pulley by a load before he lets it lift a moon. He rehearses angles not because stage magic must be complicated, but because simplicity takes rehearsal. To the audience, the night is wonder. To the workshop, it is measurement and gratitude for every hinge that does its part. There are portraits in this period as well, faces framed with patience, hair described with a kindness that turns the ordinary into a small miracle of attention. The hands in these pictures continue the quiet thesis of his life. Human skill is not an abstraction. It lives at the ends of our sleeves. The sitter's fingers rest with that delicate certainty you might feel when holding a cup that is neither too hot nor too cool. Smiles are not commands, they are invitations, and the painter meets them with the air that seems to move. Leonardo's scientific notes deepen. He copies the geometry of a vortex, not as decoration, but as insight. He draws cogs in sequences and writes about friction as if it were a personality to be understood and accommodated. He studies flight in earnest, observing birds and diagramming their arcs. He has not yet built a machine that can convince the sky, but he learns why the sky is particular and he respects the particulars. The humility is instructive. The world is not obliged to agree with our sketches must learn the world's grammar. When the day ends, the workshop returns to order. Assistants clean the brushes, the longer ones set aside to keep their hairs true. Stone floors hold the memory of footsteps that chose useful paths. On the wall, the mural looks different by the lamplight, and he steps back to learn what the night has to say about colour and shadow. In the corner, the horse waits under its cover, and a model of a canal gate sits on a low table like a puzzle solved and ready to be shared with the river. A cup of wine stands near a chalked diagram. The chalk leaves a light on the fingers that no one bothers to wash away entirely. It is part of the day's proof. He writes a few last lines before bed. They are not proclamations. They are practical routes to tomorrow. Measure the joint, test the hinge, find the worker who knows the right timber. He may add a small note to himself about a surface that seemed too eager to soak up a glaze, or a hand gesture in the mural that still feels like a sentence missing a word. He closes the book not with finality, but with the domestic confidence that the book will open again and the line will continue. If the city wakes to bells, he wakes to purpose. We can leave him here for tonight, in a Milanese room where objects explain themselves if you watch them long enough. The lamp he placed on his Florentine workbench has travelled with him in spirit. It still casts a circle over wood, where tools rest in the order that tells a hand where to reach without thinking. Outside, water slides along a stone bank with its patient syllables, and somewhere a theatre prop awaits a hinge that will make it glide as if by blessing. Light, water, hands, the three companions we started with, are still at work, still in quiet conversation. When we return, the road will take us back toward Florence and beyond, where portraits listen, maps advise, and studies of the body become acts of gratitude. For now, we set down the brush and the lamp circle holds. The road opens like a ribbon taken from a drawer, and the traveller we have been following gathers his papers, buckles a travelling chest, and turns toward Florence once more. The seasons have altered their colours, patrons have changed, as patrons will, but the thread of work continues. On the seat beside him, wrapped in linen, lie small panels, drafts, and a sheaf of notes tied with cord. A flask of ink rests inside a wooden case with a sliding lid, and a handful of chalk stubs rattle gently when the cart tilts. Water keeps him company at the edges of things, a canal, a stream, the Arno throwing back a wintry light. He studies it the way some people read novels, daily, greedily, and with the sense that the plot of the world is in the flow. Back in Florence, rooms open to him and close again like patient lungs. In one upstairs chamber the light is kind, the window catches a wedge of sky, and a chair is placed with the care one gives to a guest who will be staying for a while. On the easel waits a small panel, nothing ostentatious, perfect for an intimate conversation between painter and sitter. She arrives with a cloth draped over her hair, with hands that know where to rest, and with the willingness to sit still long enough for attention to do its most generous work. He does not rush. He lets the air thicken softly between tones so that cheek and shadow trade secrets without any sharp line spilling them. The sleeves are built from slow glazes, linen convincing because it falls where gravity asks it to. The mouth is not a riddle to be solved, but a place where breath gathers. People will give the portrait a famous name and argue about it for centuries. He, in the moment, is arranging transitions, honouring the way light leans on skin, and letting the sitter's pulse nudge the painting forward. Florence always asks for larger gestures too, and the city's hall imagines a wall that could carry a battle's energy without losing dignity. He agrees to make a design of action, enormous and urgent, charcoal and chalk rushing like a storm across paper stretched in sections. This is not a parade of violence. It is the study of decision points, of bodies leaning into necessity, of fabrics that remember wind. The cartoon grows until it is nearly a room of its own. Visitors of every rank drift in to look. Some come for the spectacle of scale, others stand quiet, drawn to the horse's turning head, to a hand that grips with purpose, to the way chaos organises itself into a readable sentence. The panel meant to follow will meet with difficulties, chemical and human. The cartoon will pass into the world as rumour and into a handful of copies. Still, even as a ghost it teaches. Motion can be drawn with the dignity of a theorem, and energy can be explained without shouting. Between sittings and meetings and experiments with big walls, he returns to the theme of families, not as a list of names, but as bodies that find one another across the frame. A mother bends to a child. A grandmother gathers them both into an embrace that seems to fold the air. A lamb is included with the sort of seriousness reserved for symbols and for living creatures who look back. The triangle of the group is soft-edged. The gazes cross and return, the figures are connected the way branches belong to a single tree. You can feel the painter's delight in how shoulders make shelter, and how one hand can rest on another and mean safety. The scene is tender, and the geology behind it, those rolling distances, the slow change of rock and water, whispers that families are also landscapes through which time walks gently. The notebooks meanwhile breed more notebooks. He writes about edges as if he is mapping a shoreline between seen and unseen. He reminds us himself to test how light is absorbed and reflected by different surfaces. Polished, rough, damp, dry, because paint is not only colour, it is memory of contact. He sets up a small darkened room and lets a sunlit day draw itself on a wall through a narrow opening, the image inverted and luminous. The camera obscura becomes an ally, not to replace looking, but to teach looking how it works. He places a lens at a window and watches how it gathers brightness and carries it to a point before letting it spread again, like a traveller who arrives with news and then settles into the village's routine. He studies the river with an engineer's patience and a poet's respect. There are proposals to make the Arno more useful to the city, to ease transport, to tame flood and marsh, to give commerce a cleaner road where once there was only mud shaped by habit. He measures slopes and sketches embankments. He notes the angle at which a current begins to steal soil from a bank and the angle at which the bank forgives the current and holds fast. He draws spirals of eddying flow and writes about how to lift water with screws and wheels. These notes have the modest heroism of household wisdom. Do this and the floor stays dry. Do that and the gate works even in winter. It is not all grand canals and royal schemes. Sometimes it is simply an improved hinge. Not all observation happens outdoors. At night, in rooms arranged with care and quiet, he studies the body. He does so with help from those who share an interest in learning how life arranges itself within us. The tools are simple: a thin knife, a quill, a sheet of paper pinned to a board, a light placed so that it reveals without glare. His writing, firm but unhurried, records the shapes of bones and muscles, the architecture of joints, the roots of vessels. There is no spectacle here, there is gratitude. The human frame is treated as a library in which pages can be read respectfully, to learn how walking, grasping and breathing are even possible. He makes notes meant to teach, diagrams meant to be understood. The result is not just anatomical knowledge, it is a gentler eye when he paints, a sense that the living surface of a person is arranged by gracious necessities underneath. Travel calls again. He goes to cities that need maps with the clarity of a good instruction, cities that want fortifications to discourage trouble without forgetting mercy, courts that appreciate a pageant and require a waterworks. At one post he produces a city plan so clear a rider could follow it without asking a passerby for directions. The map looks like a calm mind on paper, streets like sentences, plazas like commas, the river like a long patient clause that keeps the whole paragraph moving. He builds devices that test the strength of materials, sketches machines that transmit motion across angles, and draws plants with a care that suggests botany is simply portraiture for those who don't hold still. Rome appears as a chapter of courtyards and corridors. He works under the protection of a powerful household and sets up a shop where wheels and lenses keep each other company. The new air is thick with other artists' projects and priorities, and it is not always easy to be a guest in a city that already thinks it has enough opinions. He keeps to the work that prefers the company of the patient. He studies light again, but this time with pigments and oils that ask for days to reveal what they will look like when they have finally decided. He tests varnishes and writes himself reminders about the habits of smoke and the moods of wood. In these years he draws things that grow in spirals and notices that growth tends to follow patterns that can be counted even as they seem free. Seeds, shells, vines. Each becomes evidence that the world likes order, but not rigidities. In a small Roman room, he paints a figure pointing upward, a face that seems illuminated from within, hair caught in a curve like a river bend, a smile that carries old secrets without needing to utter them. The dark around the figure is not severity. It is the velvet against which a gem sits quietly. The painting belongs to the late season of his light, the kind that deepens rather than dazzles. The conversations on paper become more organised. He drafts instructions on perspective that could guide a beginner through the maze without anxiety. He writes that shadows have weight and that mist has distance, that movement should be understood before it is depicted. He describes how a painter's task is not to draw lines around things, but to understand the reasons things appear as they do. A tree is not an outline with a green interior. It is a pattern of branching that knows how to distribute wind and light. A face is not a mask. It is muscles and skin and habit and thought, appearing in concert. His notes are generous in tone. This is how you might try it. This is how the world tends to behave. Watch closely and let the world teach you. There are projects that become letters, letters that become meetings, and meetings that become rearranged calendars. He moves as the work requires, carrying a small travelling library, compasses, a folding rule, a square, a spool of thread for plumb lines, and a box that smells of walnut oil. Assistants come and go, learning to mix colours to a certain consistency by sight and by a small lift of the brush that reveals the paint's courage. He shows them how to grind slowly, how to prime a panel so it does more listening than resisting, how to shade not with black, which sulks, but with a world of quiet browns that sit where they are asked and introduce the light without fanfare. The city around him, whichever city it is this week, lives its ordinary life. Markets set up and fold down, stone warms in the sun and gives back the day's heat to the evening's feet. In such ordinary weather, he writes a note about bridges that can be carried in pieces and set up quickly, then another about a gear that prefers a certain angle of tooth. He improves a rope-making process because he observes how ropes fail, and he designs a dredging tool because he understands how harbours grow weary. None of this is glamorous, and that is the point. The headliner inventions are memorable, but the kindness of the smaller devices is what gets the world through a week without unnecessary frustrations. Occasionally he pauses simply to look. A lizard's foot on a wall, the way a candle makes a small dome of warmth. The curve of a woman's fingertip as it follows the edge of a book she has almost finished. He draws these with the practical attention of someone who knows that familiarity is the root of fluency. If you know what a fingertip likes to do, you will not fake it later. You will let the hand be itself, and the painting will thank you with credibility that no polish can imitate. There are frustrations, naturally. Paintings that refuse to dry as expected. Plaster that insists on its own schedule. Patrons who love an idea on Tuesday and have a new idea by Friday. He takes these as weather too. When a plan fails, he writes why. When a test disappoints, he puts the disappointment on a page and circles it, so the future can find it and choose another path. He is not fond of waste, especially the waste of not learning. He continues to work with others' talents in mind. He writes that young painters should walk in the countryside and draw everything, not to accumulate trophies, but to learn how variety has rules. He recommends copying the masters without embarrassment, because copying is a handshake across time. He explains that a machinery of paint exists, layers, drying times, grounds, and that ignoring it is not courage, it is carelessness that ruins afternoons. If he sounds like a friend organising a cupboard so everyone can find the salt, that is exactly the comfort. Wisdom here is domestic. Alongside instructions, he keeps designing for wonder. There is a planned festival mechanism that allows a sky to descend and rise again with the dignity of a curtain that knows its cue. There is a revolving stage idea that lets a room become a forest and then a harbour. The transitions as smooth as a thought. He tests a small model of an organ driven by water, smiles at the neatness of air pushed through pipes by a current that would have flowed anyway. The delight is not childish. It is reasonable joy at systems that cooperate. At the end of one unremarkable day, he sits by a window where the light has begun to soften. The page in front of him is half filled with notes on the behaviour of a light passing through glass into water. The ink dries with the slight shine of something that knows how to last. On a shelf, a clay model of a human shoulder waits for its next revision. On the work table lies a square of linen used for wiping brushes, the cloth now a quiet patchwork of browns and golds. A small stone keeps a stack of papers from lifting in the evening draught. Outside, a fountain repeats itself into the basin with patience. He closes the notebook and rests his fingertips on the cover for a moment, as if to let the day sink in. Travel will call again, this time northward, to rooms with thick walls and gardens where the air is easier in summer. Before he goes, he gathers the threads he has woven tighter in these years. Light, which he now treats as both subject and teacher, the very medium through which truth arrives. Water, which he understands as law and generosity, a system, a partner to cities and to thought. Hands, which he honours not only by painting them with attentive love, but by improving the tools they use, the bridges they cross, the devices that save their strength. He packs his instruments carefully, returns an item to a friend, writes a short note that reads like a promise to return, and places one last sheet of paper into the lid of his chest, where he will see it when he opens the case in a new place. We leave him standing in that familiar circle of lamplight that follows him from room to room, city to city. The lamp is the same, the bench is different, the questions are older and kinder. On the table lie lenses, a compass, a folded map of a valley, and a portrait panel wrapped like a secret. His hands rest for a moment, not from fatigue but from courtesy, to give the work the grace of a pause. Outside, the river memorises the moon. Inside, a painter-engineer closes the shutters and lets the night do what it does best, give ideas a quiet place to breathe until morning. The road north levels into gentler valleys, and the traveller carries with him a small world packed carefully, a wooden case with copper hinges, a portfolio wrapped in linen, a tin of chalks, a compass that clicks shut with the tidy confidence of a well-kept habit. The year has thrown its cloak over spring, and the air near the Loire holds the smell of wet stone and flowering hedges. He arrives at a house of warm brick and pale timber, Clos Lucé, linked by a short walk to a royal chateau where decisions are made in rooms that glow with tapestries and cordial talk. Here, distance is courteous. The king can be reached in a handful of quiet minutes, and yet there is still a garden path where a man may pause to stroke the leaf of a fig and decide, without hurry, what to think next. Francis, young and curious, welcomes Leonardo as first painter, architect and engineer, a title that politely refuses to choose. The rooms on the upper floor are set in domestic order. A bed of carved walnut, a writing desk near a mullioned window, a hearth where a modest fire keeps the damp honest, and a heavy table that bears the weight of papers without complaint. Assistants accompany him, one steady as a ledger, another mercurial as a ribbon in wind, and a few paintings travel under cloth like private guests. A smiling sitter, whose reputation has already gone ahead of her, a saint whose lifted hand points upward, a group of figures tangled in a tender triangle that makes philosophy feel like family. The house creaks the way good houses do. Latches have their opinions. The stair learns his tread and chooses to welcome him without remark. He sets up the workshop as if planting a small orchard. Each tool has a place. Each place earns the right to hold its tool. A long drawer takes the lenses in neat cloth wraps. A shallow box keeps inks in stoppered vials labelled in a tidy hand. On a shelf, models of gears sit shoulder to shoulder, like neighbours after a market day. The garden becomes a second studio where water gives lessons by example. He watches the current work itself around a stone, and notes how the surface writes the story of what the bed of the stream has decided. When rain puddles, he kneels to see how the first drops claim their circles. He's older now, and the body consults its calendar more often, but the mind is the same kind of traveller it has always been. Delighted by invitations, gentle with evidence, stubborn with its questions when stubbornness is warranted. Work for the court arrives in bundles of purpose. There are entertainments to design, not as trifles but as public demonstrations that joy too can be well engineered. He sketches a dome of stars that can rise and set without argument, a moving sky that knows how to behave. He drafts pageant devices that unfurl with the dignity of a sail catching wind, and he places his mechanism under velvet and gilded paper so that the audience sees only grace. The pleasure is honest. The backstage looks like a carpenter's hymn, the front of house looks like a blessing. If you've ever admired a beautifully organised kitchen at a friend's home, and then complimented the cake instead of the shelving, you understand the arrangement. There are plans as well for a new city at Romorantin, a place imagined as a humane machine. Streets learn from air and water rather than defy them. Housing and workspaces talk to one another across courtyards planted for shade. Canals are asked to carry more than barges, to carry health. Leonardo draws with the humility of someone who has watched neighbourhoods flood and dry again and knows what modest improvements can spare a day of needless trouble. Some of these proposals remain on paper, not because they lack sense, but because paper has less friction than reality. He accepts this with the maturity of a craftsman who knows that good ideas often need a longer runway than one lifetime provides. In the quiet hours, his notebooks continue their slow, faithful migration from thought to page. Francesco Melzi, careful and affectionate, helps bring order to the abundance, gathering sheets in folios, copying where necessary, compiling the treatise on painting that Leonardo has been writing in fragments for years, a kindly manual for future hands. The pages on perspective explain themselves without scolding. The notes on a cut are patient reminders that shadows are not mistakes but evidence. The passages on anatomy read like letters to someone who will be grateful to find a map drawn by a considerate guide. The handwriting stays strong. The diagrams retain their confidence. There is no rush to publish, only the domestic hope that what is carefully kept will one day be carefully used. Visitors come. Some arrive out of curiosity, some out of courtesy. One or two because news has a way of persuading travel into reverence. The king himself walks to Clos Lucé more than once, not merely to patronise but to learn. He is said to ask questions with the greed appropriate to youth and power. Leonardo answers in the same tone he uses for anyone seriously in love with a subject. Direct, cheerful, precise where possible, and comfortably speculative where only speculation is honest. A spring afternoon might find them at a window looking across to the river, while a page stands ready, with a board for drawings that explain better than sentences do. To a thoughtful listener, a pencil line can be as persuasive as a royal decree. The paintings he brought continue to receive his attention. Varnishes are tested, glazes refreshed, edges softened not to hide age, but to keep a breath moving. He touches a sleeve here, a shadow there, with the care of someone darning a favourite sweater so finely that even the wearer must search for the repair. He advises younger painters who visit, reminding them that a portrait is not a likeness alone but an agreement with time. Let the air do some of the work, he says in so many words. Paint the way light behaves in a room, and the room will go on behaving even when you are not here to supervise it. This house is a good place for endings because it understands beginnings. A child's toy is found in the grass near the kitchen door. The baker's boy delivers a loaf warm enough to perfume the corridor all the way to the workshop. Melzi files a bundle and ties it with cord that makes a modest little bow. No trumpets, just a bell somewhere across the town noting the hour for those who want to befriend a schedule. Leonardo writes more of the treatise, shaping the wisdom of a lifetime into sentences built to be carried by anyone with a brush and patience. He returns to problems that never wore out their welcome. The curl of water and smoke, the way a leaf places itself on a branch, the surprising kindness of spiral growth. The world keeps reporting that it likes to be both lawful and free. You sense, in these rooms, the companionship of tools. A bone-handled knife with two favourite angles. A metal ruler with a shy dent from a day that went harder than it needed to. A lamp whose wick has become through practice exactly the right length for an evening's discipline. The old energy is still present, but it is channeled now through narrower gates. He no longer climbs scaffolds much, he sends his mind instead, which has better knees. He dictates notes some days because the wrist would prefer a rest. If he ever jokes, gently, the way a seasoned worker jokes with a friendly apprentice, it might be that time is an excellent project manager who occasionally arrives with a surprising list of deliverables. He thinks often of water. The Loire offers a different persuasion than the Arno, carrying a broader, slower grammar. He sketches eddies from the bridge and then sketches the idea of an eddy, the general law instead of the specific swirl, and leaves them side by side like cousins. He writes again about friction, about how surfaces meet and decline to pass through each other, about how motion finds ways to continue as long as it has a friend willing to shoulder a portion of the work. Centuries later, others will formalize these observations with apparatus and equations. His pages will read like early letters addressed to their laboratories. He thinks also of hands, not as the old motif only, but as a farewell theme. Hands learned his craft and taught it back to him. They carried paint to panels and turned cranks in workshops and lifted theatre skies into position. They corrected drawings with a slip of knife blade here and there, a pairing that made an argument cleaner. In the notebooks he speaks directly to future hands. Be orderly, be curious, walk, look, let the world show you how it prefers to be drawn. If you cannot finish a thing, leave the path swept for the next traveller. This is the modest heroism of craftsmanship, a courtesy given to a stranger you will never meet. The house fills with weather and with goodbye. In the spring of 1519 he grows lighter, the way a tree sometimes does when it yields its remaining leaves to wind as a kindness to itself. The documents are made ready, the possessions accounted for, the notebooks placed under Melzi's attentive care. He has what a life of restless service seldom promises: a bed in a quiet room, friends who respect both the work and the worker, and the chance to arrange the desk so that tomorrow will be easy for those who return to it. The closing of his eyes is not an event for drums. It is a domestic gesture, like placing the last tool where it belongs and smoothing the cloth over the table with a palm. What remains of him is large and quiet, like the river at dusk. The works he finished continue to gaze back at us with the unusual confidence of things that understand more than their surfaces. The works he left incomplete became schools in themselves, rooms where later artists learned not just how to start, but how to think while starting. The notebooks walk out into the world in pieces, crossing borders and centuries. Some are bound into the Codex Atlanticus, a library of diagrams and notes big enough to feel like a city of paper. Some pages travel to royal collections, where careful keepers preserve studies of muscles and bones that anatomists will later salute with professional gratitude. Melzi compiles the teachings into a treatise, and though editors and translators will be busy for generations, the voice remains plainly his, generous, precise where precision is possible, and amused by the ways painters can make their lives harder than necessary. In art, his influence is not a monument but a habit. Painters after him look more slowly and mix air into their colours. Portraiture accepts that people are not masks to be pinned down, but climates to be suggested. Compositions place their vanishing points not as proud tricks, but as acts of hospitality, guiding a viewer's eye the way a host guides a guest to a comfortable chair. Landscape becomes both setting and subject. The science of distance, the feel of weather, the way light can turn a ridge into a sentence that reads left to right. Illustration gains a conscience. When he draws a plant, he means it to be identified. When he draws a machine, he means it to be built. The drawing is therefore honest about what must be seen, named, measured. In science and engineering, his gift is not a single device, though he sketched many beginnings of the new. Flying machines that read the sky with bird-like respect. Bridges meant to be assembled in a day. Devices to lift water as if it were a companion rather than a weight. His lasting offering is the habit of attention that moves from the drawing board to the world and back again. Look, test, revise, look again. Treat friction as a neighbour to be understood, not an enemy to be cursed. Give the worker a lever that spares the spine. Imagine a city that breathes because water moves cleanly through it. And if a design must remain on paper, let the paper be so clear that someone else can pick it up without needing to guess your intent. Many revolutions are made of exactly this tone. Modest instructions that ensure there is no confusion about which way the hinge swings. Culture takes more from him than technique. It borrows a posture. The border between art and science, so confidently patrolled in some eras, seems, under his lamp, as imaginary as chalk dust. A painter is allowed to be a geometer. A geometer is invited to admire a sleeve. A stage designer reads anatomy. A mason reads hydrology. You hear this invitation echoing in studios and labs even now, when filmmakers place a table at the precise angle that gathers the eye to a speaker, when photographers let a face fade into shadow instead of forcing a line, when engineers draw a cutaway with the angles that a non-engineer can love. There he is, not as a celebrity, but as the friend who taught you a trick so useful you can no longer remember the day you learned it. The myths around him will grow, as myths do around any light that still warms the room. It is fine to let them be conversation pieces on the mantel. What matters is simpler and closer. He kept faith with attention. He turned curiosity into a domestic routine. Sweep the bench, lay out the tools, ask the next small necessary question. He believed that beauty and usefulness are good neighbours, that entertainment and understanding can share a stage, that the body and the city prefer order that is kind. He gave the world pictures that breathe and pages that think out loud. He treated knowledge as a form of love you can practice with your hands. We can stand for a moment at the window of Clos Lucé. The garden path keeps its promise of a turn toward the river. On the table near us lies a folded map of a valley, a lens that has learned to rest where it is put, a quill whose point is still sharp enough to begin again. Light has lowered itself across the room until it occupies only a corner of the floorboards, and the hearth gives a minimal heat that belongs to late evening. The tools are sleeping lightly. You might imagine that the lamp we first lit over a Florentine workbench has been carried here and set down once more, its circle steady, its purpose unchanged. In your own room, perhaps there is a notebook within reach, a pencil, a glass of water catching a small ring of light. The river keeps moving. The hands that will build tomorrow are resting. The lamp is content to keep watch. And so, our journey for tonight comes to a quiet close. The story lingers, like the last glow of candlelight, as you drift further into rest. If these gentle wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to like and subscribe so that whenever you wish, you may return and we can travel together once more. For now, dear listener, may your dreams be kind and your night be restful. Until next time.